The sun never sets on the British Empire. That was the boast of kings and conquerors who once ruled over a quarter of the Earth's surface, from the icy highlands of Canada to the sweltering jungles of the Congo. From the golden sands of Egypt to the teeming ports of Hong Kong. The Union Jack flew not just as a flag, but as a symbol of order, dominion, and inevitability. And yet, no great war brought it down. No foreign army toppled it. No single moment marks its death. The empire simply vanished piece by piece, crown by crown, as if history itself had tired of its reign. But how does such a colossal power, one built on steel, gunpowder, and centuries of conquest, slip quietly into the pages of memory? What invisible forces undid the greatest empire the world has ever seen? Let us begin, not with the fall, but with the slow unraveling. The Second World War is often remembered as a triumph of British courage. The Blitz, Dunkirk, Churchill's voice echoing through radios. We shall never surrender. But beneath the patriotic glow was a deeper truth. By 1945, Britain had won the war and lost the world. It had mortgaged its future to fight Hitler, draining its coffers, selling off gold, and indebting itself to the United States. Its cities were bombed, its economy exhausted, and its illusion of invincibility shattered. The empire's soldiers, drawn from every corner of its vast dominions, had fought and bled not for conquest, but for survival, and many began to ask a dangerous question. Why die for an empire that treats us as subjects, not sons? They called it the jewel in the crown. But India, the empire's richest possession, did not explode into rebellion. It cracked open like a lotus, with a hunger strike, not a bayonet, with salt in the sea, not bullets in the air, with silence louder than any cannon fire. In 1947, without a war, without a decisive battle, India was free. And when the jewel fell, the crown began to loosen. The world was shifting, and Britain could no longer hold it still. If there was a moment, a crack that revealed the rot, it was Suez. Egypt's president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, had nationalized the Suez Canal. Britain, clinging to its past, joined France and Israel to take it back by force. But the old imperial arrogance met a new world order. The United States, eager to shape the post-war world, said no, not with bullets, but with dollars. By threatening to collapse the British pound, they forced a retreat. The message was clear. Britain no longer ruled the waves, and this time the empire bent not from resistance abroad, but obedience to new masters. Scene shift quiet. Countryside of Kenya, archival photos of Momo rebels. The death of an empire isn't always written in headlines. Sometimes it's scratched into prison walls, carved into the silence of censored letters, etched into the scars of forgotten men and women. In Kenya, the Momo uprising was not just a rebellion. It was a memory set on fire. The British responded with internment camps, torture, and suppression, desperate to hold on to a dying dream. But the world was watching now. And for every rebellion that failed, 10 more voices whispered, "We are not your subjects, we are your equals." There was no trumpet to signal the end, no final battle, no collapsing wall, only a quiet vanishing act. The colonies became nations, the rulers became relics, and the empire, once eternal, became history. But that's only the surface. Because beneath the flags and treaties, beneath the speeches and ceremonies, something else was happening. A deeper unraveling, an erosion of belief itself. And the question no historian dares ask, did the empire fall, or was it allowed to fade? We're only beginning to see the threads that were pulled, and what they reveal might change how we see not only Britain but the nature of power itself. To understand how the empire truly collapsed, we must go deeper into secret negotiations, forgotten rebellions, and the invisible machinery of influence. Still operating in the shadows today, this is only the beginning. Empires rarely collapse from without. The most devastating revolutions begin in silence inside the minds of those who no longer believe in the myth. and by the mid-20th century, the British Empire was running on belief alone. The idea that some were born to rule and others to serve, that order flowed naturally from the island. Outward, like light from the sun, but light bends. And the world had started to see shadows. They were hailed as heroes. Men from Jamaica, Ghana, India, Burma. They had fought beside white soldiers in trenches, deserts, and skies, risked everything to defend the mother country. But when they returned, they were met not with honor, but humiliation. Separate canteens, lower wages, doors, closed to education and opportunity. In the minds of many colonized peoples, the truth rang louder than any anthem. If we were good enough to die for Britain, why are we not good enough to live free under her? The very war meant to protect the empire had become the spark that ignited its undoing. When the ship Empire Windrush docked in 1948, carrying hundreds of Caribbean migrants, Britain had called for help. Its industries were crumbling, its workforce depleted, its empire, ironically, needed its former subjects. But as black and brown faces entered British neighborhoods, a knees followed. These were not invaders, they were citizens of the empire, yet they were treated as strangers in the land they had fought to defend. And with them came a silent reckoning. The empire was no longer out there. It was coming home, and Britain wasn't ready. The word war was never used. Instead, it was called an emergency, a neat euphemism for a brutal guerrilla conflict in the jungles of Malaya. Here, too, Britain fought not with glory, but with bureaucracy and covert force. Communists, nationalists, and the poor all blurred into a single threat. And though Britain eventually quelled the uprising, it won nothing, because by then every battle felt like trying to hold back the tide. One by one, British colonies in Asia began demanding independence not in explosions of violence, but in the slow, steady rhythm of inevitability. Power, once exported, had begun to circle back. In the late 50s and early 60s, a flood of newly independent nations emerged across Africa: Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, Zambia, each born not of conquest but negotiation. Yet what is often forgotten is this: Britain rarely gave up its empire willingly. It was persuaded, strategically, quietly. Colonial administrators shifted into new suits as advisors, bankers, and diplomats. Though the flags changed, the levers of influence often remained: mines, railways, debt. The architecture of control was rebuilt, not razed. And in the twilight of the empire, a subtler form of rule took hold, what some would later call neo-colonialism. Even as it crumbled abroad, the empire endured in memory. British children still learned of noble conquests, civilizing missions, and the benevolence of empire. The brutal realities of famines in India, massacres in Kenya, stolen artifacts in London's museums were papered over with red ink and polite pride. And so, the empire never truly died. It disappeared into myth, but myths, like fog, can obscure deeper truths. In recent years, the ghosts have returned. Statues once revered now provoke protest. Old records are unsealed. Reparations are demanded. A younger generation no longer accepts the official story. They ask, why were we not taught this? What was taken in silence? And what still remains hidden? Because even as the empire faded, its consequences never left. They live on in the borders it drew, in the conflicts it seeded, in the wealth it hoarded, in the languages, names, and identities it reshaped. The empire may be gone, but its fingerprints are everywhere. No guns fired in surrender, no fortresses stormed, only the quiet click of pens signing treaties, the rustle of ships leaving harbors for the last time, the slow exhale of a power losing its grip not to force, but to time. The British Empire did not fall in battle. It dissolved in the mirror, when it could no longer convince even itself of its purpose. But we still ask, was it all planned? Or did it slip through the fingers of kings and parliament like sand? In the next part, we'll peer even deeper into the secret pacts, the unspoken debts, and the quiet rewriting of power, because the story of the empire's end is not just about what was lost, but what replaced it. The British Empire, they say, is gone. But here's a strange thing. Its beating heart was never just in the colonies. It was here, behind the fog of London, in the gilded halls of finance, in quiet clubs and unseen corridors, and even after the flags were lowered abroad. Power remained untouched at home because the British Empire, perhaps, did not collapse. It transformed. As independence swept across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean, Britain did something unexpected. It rebranded the empire, not as a memory, but as a network, the Commonwealth, a community of equals, they said. But beneath the ceremony and sports diplomacy, trade agreements were rewritten. Resources flowed the same direction they always had. And Britain, though no longer wearing the crown of conqueror, wore a subtler mask: the mentor, the banker, the insider. The structures remained, only the names changed. Now let us look at the map closely. Even today, many of the world's major tax havens are not independent nations. They are former colonies or overseas territories of Britain. The Cayman Islands, Bermuda, Gibraltar, the Isle of Man. Their names rarely make headlines, but their financial flows do. They are shadows of the empire, ghost colonies still governed by British law, still serving British interests, and it's in these places where wealth vanishes and reappears elsewhere, out of reach, untaxed, untraceable. The empire may have abandoned physical conquest, but it mastered invisible dominion. After Suez, after India, after Kenya, there were those in Whitehall who understood. The sun had set, but night offered new cover. Instead of soldiers, there would be intelligence officers. Instead of governors, trade envoys. Instead of conquest, persuasion. Documents now declassified reveal covert operations to control oil-rich territories, to influence elections, to prevent leftist movements from rising. No more redcoats, only red lines drawn in sand and signed behind closed doors. And so, Britain's power became paradoxical. It lost the empire, but not the influence. Debt replaced chains. Where brute force once ruled, now came austerity, interest rates, and structural adjustment programs. Many newly independent nations found themselves locked into new forms of servitude, economically tethered to former colonial powers, their policies dictated by distant institutions. And while the empire no longer extracted gold from mines or tea from plantations, it extracted something else: compliance, control, and above all, silence. Scene shift: British museums, artifacts under glass, the Rosetta Stone, been in bronzes, Indian jewels, but the past refuses to stay buried. All across the world, voices are rising. Return what was taken, tell the truth, end the myth. Because power, when left unaccounted, becomes legacy, and legacy, when left unquestioned, becomes destiny. The treasures behind glass in London do not merely tell stories of the past. They whisper secrets about the present, that history is not over. It lives in every border, every coin, every silence we inherit. So here we are. The British Empire did not fall. It faded into structure, into systems that appear neutral, even benevolent. A trade agreement, a university scholarship, a language spoken across continents. But look closely and you'll see the imprint of empire. In everything, the laws, the loans, the very idea of development, and perhaps the greatest illusion of all, that it ended. The story we've followed of quiet exits and unseen deals is not just about Britain. It is about all of us, because empires are not just nations, they are ideas. Ideas that claim dominance is natural, that history moves only in one direction, that some must lead, while others follow. But now we see the cracks in the statues, in the silence, in the very stories we tell, and we are left with questions. Who writes history? What have we forgotten? and what still remains hidden in plain sight. Not with a bang, nor even a whisper, but with a glance away. The empire vanished and left its shadow behind. They told us the empire ended. They told us it was history, a lesson, a legacy, a chapter now closed, but echoes do not die. They ripple across oceans, through generations, between the cracks of our modern lives. What we called the end may have only been a transformation. Consider this. When the empire was at its height, it built more than railways and parliaments. It built narratives, a sense of time, a version of progress, a hierarchy of civilization itself. To colonize a land, it is not enough to occupy the soil. You must occupy the memory. And so it did. It renamed rivers. It rewrote gods. It redrew maps not only of geography, but of identity. Even now, many who live free still carry the borders drawn by empire on passports. In language, in blood, we began our story with a vanishing act, a disappearance without war. But what if the empire's collapse wasn't a failure, but a sleight of hand? A magician's trick, a shift of focus. While we looked for battles, it moved into banks. While we searched for flags, it rewrote finance. While we watched statues fall, it was building skyscrapers of silent power. The empire may no longer wear red, but it whispers through algorithms. It navigates through boardrooms. It flows invisibly through law, trade, media, perception. And now we must ask ourselves, when power becomes invisible, can it ever be named again? When colonization leaves the soil and enters the soul, where do we begin to heal? Yet here is the quiet revolution, not with guns, not with thrones, but with memory. Communities reclaiming their past, artists painting new myths. Historians unearthing the uncomfortable truths, children asking questions their grandparents were too afraid to speak aloud. The empire may have written the first draft, but the story is still being rewritten by voices once silenced, by nations once shadowed, by us. The sun may have set on the British Empire, but perhaps in the darkness that followed, we learned to see what had always been hidden by its light. When the empire left, it took the crown, but left the mirror, and now we are learning to look again.